I'm going to be walking you through a workout that I had performed just a few days ago, and you can see on screen the progression of the different exercises, of which there are 8, starting off with wide grip bench press that I supersetted with wide grip pull-ups. I then moved on to the hack squat, to the leg curls. I then supersetted neck flexions with calf raises, and then my last superset was between the pec flies and reverse flies. This training program is designed to optimize for aesthetics, for achieving a masculine aesthetic physique, and by extension is not something that is going to suit you if you have a specific sport that you're training for, be it Olympic lifting, strongman, MMA. This is going to be specifically geared towards the average everyday recreational bodybuilder who just wants to look better and also feel better. So this is very congruent with optimal human health and is a component of a training philosophy that I became familiar with about a decade ago. And I'd like to pass along the pearls of wisdom that I've garnered ever since. So let's start off first with the wide grip bench press. And I think what you're going to be able to appreciate are just some of the subtle nuances that I'll do my best to explicate so that you are armed with the greatest information if you choose to adopt this training methodology. The wide grip bench press here is something that is going to be helping develop the pecs, the chest. And you'll see that I take a very exaggerated wide grip, right? This isn't a cock measuring contest where I'm trying to lift as many times as possible 2 plates, but rather I'm taking the 2 plates because I know that that is an appropriate weight for me adopting this form. So you can see, and I could even do better and will do better in the future. I'll show you lowering even higher up on the chest than I am here. But I'll put my cursor over where ideally I would be lowering the bar to. So in my next workout, I will just take off a little bit of that weight and be sure to emphasize the importance of form. So with all of these exercises, form first, ego at the door. It doesn't matter how you're being perceived. Adopt the form that maximizes the recruitment of the target muscles and then get as strong as possible from that point in time. So what I do is a superset for reasons of efficiency. If we're being honest, you only have so much time to exchange for your desired outcome, a better body, experiencing more energy, more vitality, optimizing your male hormones. All of these are something that you are obtaining in exchange for your time, of which you have a finite supply. So what I like to do is a superset, which effectively doubles the amount of recovery time that I have in between subsequent sets of the same exercise. I'll expound upon that in just a minute after we watch the wide grip pull-ups here, of which I will start off with a warm-up set, which I actually do as well for the bench press. I'll just put 1 plate on the bar and just do 5 or 6 reps before working up to my full working set of 2 plates. And the same point here being that I start off with just body weight wide grip pull-ups, and then I'm adding 10 kilograms by way of a dip belt. But you can probably appreciate here that just like with the bench press, I'm not adopting a mechanically advantageous form. And that's one thing that you'll recognize is that the form that optimizes aesthetics is not actually mechanically optimized. In other words, it's not going to maximize your ability to lift whatever resistance, whatever weight from point A to point B as fast as possible, but rather is going to maximize the recruitment of the target muscles, in this case, the latissimus dorsi, your back. And this is going to help improve your V-taper and your overall aesthetic appeal as a man. And so you can see here, controlling the eccentric. I'm not super sporadic. I'm not bouncing out of the hole. I'm not bouncing from the top position. It's control. It's time under tension. And I'm training to failure without actually failing. I'm leaving at most 1 to 2 reps in the tank here. And what I want to expound upon, as I alluded to just a few minutes ago, is the prudence of supersetting. So I'll superset the wide grip bench press with the wide grip pull-ups. And I do that because by oscillating between them, if I'm resting 90-second intervals, that actually gives me 180 seconds rest between subsequent sets of both the bench press and the pull-ups. And in the case of the bench press, which is predominantly performed by way of fast twitch muscle fibers, for example, which take longer to recover, I'm going to be optimizing the hypertrophy of them by giving them the benefit of that longer rest in between sets. And so the third exercise here that I want to draw your attention to as part of this workout is the hack squat. And what you'll be able to see here is, again, just going along with the theme of optimizing or maximizing the recruitment of the target muscle, as opposed to adopting the form that optimizes the mechanical advantage. I'm not doing what is going to allow me to lift the most amount of weight. And that's evidenced by the fact that I'm breaking parallel. I'm not just doing a parallel squat, but rather I'm breaking that plane and I'm going ATG. So what you would ideally do is go as low as you possibly can in that bottom position and don't bounce out of the hole. In that bottom position, you are in a stretched position where the muscles are at their longest point, which is the least mechanically advantageous, but it's actually the most advantageous from a hypertrophy perspective. And so what I'm doing here, this is actually my first working set. And again, I'm training to failure without actually failing. It's very important to actually train close to failure. And I would recommend going to technical failure. So if your form starts to break down, especially if you're new to the gym, then feel free to end the set at that point. Over time, what's going to happen is you will develop an intuition, a sixth sense, as it were, for how many reps you actually are or are not leaving in the tank. And so the hack squat is a great movement for building the quads and even the glutes if you get deep enough. If you have just a conventional barbell and you want to get under that and do some high bar squats, I would recommend those over the lower bar squat, which again is more mechanically advantageous. Your torso is going to be leaning more forward. You'll be able to lift more, but ultimately you're not going to be stimulating as much hypertrophy. And so again, the idea is pick the form that optimizes for the recruitment of the target muscle and ideally will be bottlenecked by the exhaustion of that muscle. And what I mean by that is that if you're squatting, but you have terrible cardiorespiratory fitness, and that's what's actually holding you back from maxing out, then the problem is that, not dissimilar to, for example, if you're doing forearms, you're performing wrist curls and your grip gives out before your forearms. The truth is that that's not actually going to be an optimal exercise for you because you're not actually training the targeted muscle group to failure. And so the philosophy here is that we're training muscles and not movements. The movement is sort of secondary. We don't necessarily care how much we're lifting, but only relative to the form that we're adopting. Once you've adopted that form, you progressive overload from that point, but you don't out of the gate adopt the form that allows you to lift the most amount of weight. And so the next exercise that'll pull up here are leg curls. And of course, this is going to be targeting the hamstrings. And one quick aside is that depending on how many years you've been lifting, you will have to tailor the volume for each of these exercises to you. In my case, my quads, my legs, I believe are north of 24 inches. I believe they're about 25 inches now. And so I've been combining my leg day with my chest and back so that every other day I'm training arms. I would like to get to a 17-inch upper arm if possible. I'm at about 16 inches right now. That's going to be different for you because your allocation of volume is just going to be based on, frankly, your genetic disposition, which muscle groups happen to be bigger or smaller relative to one another, your training history, basically just where you're at this point in time. But with this exercise here, again, I'm controlling the eccentric. I'm powerful on the concentric as much as possible. And I'm training the hamstrings and I'm really focused on them and I'm activating them to the greatest extent possible. And my focus is on exhausting them, really training them to failure or close to failure without actually failing. Now, one thing that I should note is that if you do have access to a seated leg curl, that is actually superior to what I'm doing, which is a lying leg curl. The truth is that just this gym and the particular ergonomics of the seated leg curl that they have, I just couldn't get to work. It just never felt quite right for me. And that's another overarching theme as well as that, just due to nuances in our physiology, in our tendon attachment points, in our anatomy at large. Certain exercises may just not feel right. And don't second guess yourself if that's the case. Really use your intuition. And if an exercise doesn't feel right, then you need to find an analogous one that targets that same muscle group equally effectively, but it's going to be better for you just given your particular anatomy. So again, if you do have access to a seated leg curl, I would definitely recommend that. And that would be priority number one if you do happen to have that option. So the next pairing, the next superset is going to be training my neck and then training my calves. So you got to be really careful on this one. The neck is a very delicate area, and this is more of an advanced exercise that you probably won't be seeing a lot of people doing. So I just want to issue the forewarning, the caveat that this is dangerous and you need to proceed with caution. So you can see here on my phone, I'm setting up a timer. This is just the best way that I've found to track progress. When I get above a 30-second isometric hold, that's when I'm going to be adding weight. I've got a 5 kilo plate, another 5 kilo, and a 2.5. So it's 12.5 kilos, which is over 25 pounds. You can see I'm getting into position. I'm using a neck harness, and I'm training the neck in a stretched position. This is very important. Notice that the bench is not parallel, but rather is at a bit of an incline. So if you can train this at an incline and have your neck more in the stretch position, that will actually induce more hypertrophy. So you can see I did a little bit of a time lapse. We're at 24 seconds now. I'm holding the weight. Make sure to have your hands ready. Once your neck gives out, you have to be really careful on this one, training to failure. And basically what I'm doing is in my mind, I'm counting out 10 seconds. So that you can see when I hit the pause button, I'm going to be subtracting 10 seconds. And that's what I'll write down in my Google Keep app, basically to just track progress. So in this case, 26.91 seconds. Once that gets north of 30, that's when I'm going to be adding the next smallest increment, which at the gym that I'm going to is about 1.25 kilos. That's when I will tack on another of the smallest plates possible. So you can see here again, and I could be using a bit more of an incline. I'll show that in the future. I'm using a bit more of an incline now. At first, you can start with parallel if that's something that you're more comfortable with. But again, just be careful training to failure on this one, because the neck is a very delicate area and it's something that you really don't want to strain. If you've ever had a bad night of sleep, slept on it wrong, and you woke up with a stiff neck, you know just how bad that can feel. So strengthening your neck is going to be very important for your overall aesthetics. And a lot of people have a wider jawline than they do neck. And what you'll find is that over time, as you broaden that neck, you just look a lot thicker, a lot more masculine overall, and is really going to improve your overall aesthetics. The next exercise here are going to be calf raises here. And this is a standing calf raise machine. Standing is vastly superior to seated if you can do this. And this sort of a machine is fairly new to me. Typically what I would do historically is use a Smith machine. Again, you have to apply this to whatever equipment you happen to have available to you, but just make note of the tempo here. I'm doing a nice stretch at the bottom. I'm not bouncing out of the hole. I'm performing a weight that I can perform for about 15 reps. For calves, 12 to 20 is a pretty good range. Calves tend to recover pretty quickly, so you don't have to rest quite as long in between sets. You can see I'm just re-racking here. Going for another set here. And I actually want to rewind a little bit, and I want to point out something in particular, which is when I was making a foot adjustment here. See right there, I'm gonna actually pause that. Watch the feet, making a little bit of an adjustment, right? So what's gonna happen over time potentially is that your feet, just for reasons of friction or lack thereof, may just slide off the platform a little bit. Maybe you're using plates and you're using a squat rack or a Smith machine, and your foot positioning just gets a little bit out of whack. Then you may have to make just a minor adjustment to get back in place, and that is perfectly normal and expected. So the last pairing here that I wanted to go over with you is going to be rounding out the workout by going back to the pecs and the rear delts. And so what I start off with is a pec fly here. And with all exercises, it's important to be aware of when the muscles are in a lengthened versus a shortened position. So at the end of the eccentric, so this is concentric, eccentric, concentric, eccentric, right there at the end of the eccentric, right there, that's why muscles are going to be in a stretched position, and that's where hypertrophy is going to be optimized. So if you took one person, say me, who's only training in this range right here at the end of the concentric, just as my arms are almost touching, versus someone like maybe you, we had you training properly, which is in the stretched position, say way out here, and you only did the first half of the ROM, whereas I was performing the latter half or quarter of the ROM, you would actually induce a lot more hypertrophy. So it's very important to get back to that stretched position. And the parlay of that for squatting, as we had talked about, is squatting very deep. Don't worry about the fact that you're not going to be able to lift as much from point A to point B, because again, we care about the induction of hypertrophy. So what I will superset these with are rear delt flies. And you can see that I'm using the same machine here. And you can see I'm just getting the machine adjusted right now, making the necessary adjustments. And then I'll be starting off with the concentric movement, followed by the eccentric, concentric, eccentric. Now notice that it's actually at the end of the eccentric, right? Again, just like we talked about with the pec fly, at the end of the eccentric, I'm in the stretched position. So the most hypertrophy that I'm inducing here is actually in the first half of this range of motion. At the end of the eccentric, from here to there, is going to be more effective than from there to there, right? It's going to be most effective at the start of the range of motion. I still recommend training in a full ROM, a full range of motion. It's just something that you want to be mindful of. And so that's going to wrap this workout here. You can see not a ton of exercises, just 8 exercises to train the entirety of my chest, back, and legs. And that's really born out of the recognition of the wisdom of what Bruce Lee once said, which is that we fear not the man who practiced 10,000 kicks at one time, but rather the man who practiced one kick 10,000 times. And so what you want to do is, just like with nutrition, just pick the best foods, pick the best exercises, and double, triple down on them. Adopt the form that maximizes the recruitment of the target muscles, and then just get as brutally strong with that form as you possibly can without compromising on your form. And I'll make a video soon where I go over my entire arm day, and you'll see some very unique exercises that you've probably never seen before. And one of the tendencies, to my everlasting dismay, that I have with one of these exercises, side laterals specifically, is engaging my core to a fault unnecessarily, thinking that I'm progressively overloading and making gains. But the truth is that you want those gains, that progressive overload, to be merely attributed to basically 2 things: to hypertrophy of the muscle that that exercise is targeting, or potentially central nervous system adaptations, which, especially if you are newer to the gym, is going to be fairly expeditious. You're going to get stronger just because of the neurological adaptations that occur. So I hope you enjoyed this video today. Drop a comment down below. Let me know if you have any questions in terms of the programming that you are following. You know, I've been weight training now for over a decade. This has been one of the greatest personal investments that I've ever made. It really amazes me just all of the juice that I've been able to get from the squeeze of squatting, of benching, training biceps, just going to the gym and really working on myself. This is a really great microcosm for life. Progressive overload, basically just doing something today that you weren't able to yesterday, and just over time systematically increasing the load, the resistance that you then have to live up to. Don't wish it were easier, wish you were better. And until next time, my friend, find your freedom. Peace.